If you've watched Destruction 1, then you know that the name attribute is really important. And why is it important? Well, it's important because it tells the solver what it should consider one piece to be. So, for instance, let's say that this is piece number 47. Well, actually, we'll call this primary 47. That is the name attribute. So let's say that that whole chunk is primary 47. Again, the solver thinks of that as one piece. Now, if we have a secondary area, so let's say that there's a chunk right along here, right? We don't want this chunk to be primary 47, because if that's primary 47, it's going to fall with this entire thing, and it's not actually separate from this big piece as far as the solver is concerned. So in other words, we need a unique name for each one of these pieces. And we know that anytime we have another fracture of a fracture, what we ought to do is say something like this. We have primary 47 dash second 1. So second is a secondary fracture and 1. And the nice thing about saying the word second right there is that now in the future, if let's say I want to apply a drag to just the secondary fractured pieces, I now have some kind of wildcard that I can use to isolate those secondary fractures. So now, let's say I had a drag node and I wanted to mask it off. I could say something like this. I could say at name is equal to star anything with the term second in it. And that will, in the group field, isolate any sort of microsolver to a secondary fracture or a tertiary fracture or what have you. So the name, again, it helps the solver, but it also helps you in isolating each individual spot. And getting this name sorted straight is actually a little bit more involved than you might think at first if you're not used to doing this. So let's take a look at what's going on, and I'll show you what to do first, and then I'll show you what not to do afterwards, okay? So down here at the very bottom, we haven't been paying attention to name, we haven't been thinking about it yet, so I have no idea what's in this geo spreadsheet. Okay, so we have piece 4, and we have this weird rock boulder thing happening, and, well, obviously this is a mess. Starting at the very top, let's go to this assemble, and let's go ahead and change this output prefix from piece to primary, like that. So we have primary 0, and, it's for every single piece, it says primary. Okay, that's good. Now, what about down here? We're getting that rock name from this right here, and we have all sorts of attributes that we really don't need. So let's go ahead and use a clean sop after the file, so right here, and we're basically going to get rid of everything. So uncheck all of these, but then check on the remove attributes, remove groups. Now we just have position, and that's all we need for those rocks. Okay, so now that we did that, we'll go to the very bottom here, and we should see that we have primary 4, and then any piece that was generated by a Boolean is going to be empty in the name section right here. So, again, our goal is to have primary 4 on everything because that's referring to this piece. And then once we have primary 4 on everything, then we can go ahead and append that second prefix or a suffix to the end of any piece that belongs over here. Okay, so to do this, we're going to do the same trick we did with the normals, except this time we're looking for name. So let's go up here. This is where we picked up those normals. And let's go ahead and just make a copy of this and also set this to manual while we work, because this is going to try to cook a bunch of times. Okay, give ourselves some room. We want to compare this stream to what we have over here in the mainstream. So we're going to go just like that. Okay, so we have everything right now existing as points. But if we go towards the top here, right now name is acting as a primitive attribute. So there's name as a primitive attribute. However, we need to do this as points, or we don't need to, but it's handy because that wrangle is thinking about points. So let's go ahead and create an attribute promote. Attribute promotes, and give ourselves some more room again. So we'll just drag this down a little bit. And we want to take our name, which is a primitive, and set that to points. Now, if we go to our geo spreadsheets, we have primary 4 on all the points. So that's good. Okay, at this point, it makes sense to go through the node network and see if anything breaks. Because anytime you change an attribute up here as important as name, sometimes these nodes will rely upon that name as a primitive attribute in order to work. And just to let you know what I'm talking about here, if I go to the very bottom, look at this. We have a warning message saying that we have an invalid attribute called name. And if we go up here, it's like, well, what's going on? What's going on is this extract centroid here is not looking at name as a primitive, or it's looking at it as a primitive attribute. It's not looking at it as a points attributes. So we change that to points. And sometimes you need to reset this cached pass. And it's kind of hit or miss with getting this whole thing to re-kick. But basically, that's what is causing the issue here. What I would recommend is anytime you do an attribute promote on the name, and I've said this before, I would recommend not deleting the original, just for this exact reason right here. Look at how this node was expecting the primitive, and it messed the whole thing up. We don't have anything in our viewport. That error message isn't clearing out. So let's not delete the original, and then everything is going to work as you might expect it to. So we go down here, it's thinking again, we're able to refresh, our piece is back, and life is good. Okay, let's go back to our point wrangle and adjust this so that we're looking for the name instead of normal. Right here, I'm going to say name. Also, the name attribute is a string, so s at name is equal to that. And I believe that's all we need. If we go over here, set our visibility, and we turn this back to auto updates, now we have name as one of our point attributes. And if we go to our geo spreadsheets, it's going to think here for a second. And sure enough, it picked up that primary 4, which is great. Okay, so that's awesome. Now if we go to the very end here, it's going to think about all this, and everything should have primary 4 in the name to begin with. However, be sure that you really look at things closely. I'm sorting up and down like this. I see that primary 4 is everywhere. But let me highlight this and switch back and forth. And now, all of a sudden, there are 3 points that don't have any name on them. It's very, very easy to accidentally not see something like this. And so my recommendation is whenever you're examining attributes, sometimes there's a bug where the sort doesn't work properly. And so switch back and forth kind of like that, and then sort whatever attribute you're looking for. But okay, we have 3 points that don't have the primary. And what's happening here is in the Boolean, we have these checkboxes which say remove self-intersections. And that's creating geometry that is new and has no idea about the name attribute. So uncheck that, and also uncheck this collapse tiny seam adjacent edges. That will prevent the Boolean from creating any new geometry, and that's good because then that will solve our name issue. So back to auto updates, let that cook. Again, kind of go back and forth, try to sort, and everything is fine. In the next video, let's continue on.